In 1935, Aldous Huxley wrote something that would haunt him for decades. I had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning. The philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. He dismissed imagination as wishful thinking, embraced cold rationality, and built his worldview on the assumption that consciousness was just brain chemistry. 46 years later, his house burned to the ground. Everything he valued, manuscripts, letters, his entire life's work, consumed in flames. Standing in those ashes, Huxley finally understood what he'd been running from. Your imagination is not a mental faculty. It is God himself operating through you. But you've been systematically trained to dismiss this as fantasy, to be realistic, to stay grounded. Meanwhile, this creative power operates whether you acknowledge it or not, mostly creating what you fear. Here's the terrible secret. You're already using divine imagination every moment, unconsciously manifesting your limitations, your struggles, your deepest anxieties. The question isn't whether this power is real, it's whether you'll finally learn to use it consciously. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a tent maker turned apostle wrote something so dangerous that religious institutions have spent centuries burying its true meaning. Paul of Tarsus wasn't just sharing spiritual platitudes when he penned his first letter to the Corinthians. He was documenting a precise technology of consciousness that would terrify anyone who profits from keeping humanity asleep. We speak God's wisdom in a mystery, Paul wrote, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the world unto our glory. Most people read this and think Paul was being mystical, speaking in religious riddles. They're wrong. Paul was describing the most practical spiritual technology ever documented, the mechanism by which human consciousness literally creates reality. Here's where it gets interesting. Paul makes an absolute statement that should stop you in your tracks. The natural man cannot receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Then he delivers the key. Only the Spirit of God can comprehend the thoughts of God. Now, where does Paul say this Spirit resides? Not in some distant heaven, not in church buildings or religious ceremonies. Paul locates it precisely in what he calls the inner man, what we today recognize as human imagination. The very faculty you've been taught to dismiss as mere fantasy is, according to Paul, the dwelling place of divine consciousness itself. Think about the implications. If only God's Spirit can know God's thoughts, and that Spirit operates through human imagination, then your imagination isn't separate from divine consciousness. It is divine consciousness expressing itself through you. This isn't metaphor. This is Paul describing how reality actually works. But Paul goes further. He lays out the exact mechanism. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Everyone thinks they understand this verse about karma or consequences. They don't. The Greek word Paul uses for sow is spero, which specifically refers to the act of scattering seeds with intention and sustained effort. Paul isn't talking about random thoughts or fleeting wishes. He's describing sustained mental activity. Every image you hold consistently in your imagination, every scenario you repeatedly visualize with conviction, becomes a seed planted in the fertile ground of consciousness. And just like physical seeds, these mental seeds must germinate into physical reality. It's not a moral principle, it's a law of nature. Herbert Hoover once observed that all human history can be written in terms of ideas implanted in minds. He was closer to the truth than he realized, but even Hoover didn't go deep enough. Every war, every revolution, every rise and fall of nations began as sustained images in someone's imagination. Napoleon saw himself as emperor long before he wore a crown. The Wright brothers flew in their minds thousands of times before they left the ground at Kitty Hawk. Hitler's twisted vision of a 1,000-year Reich started as obsessive mental imagery that he sustained with fanatic conviction. Here's what's crucial. These weren't special people with unique powers. They were ordinary humans who discovered, consciously or unconsciously, how to use their imagination as the creative force Paul described. They held specific images with unwavering persistence until those images became physical reality. Now, consider how this knowledge has been weaponized against you. Every news broadcast, every social media feed, every entertainment program is designed to capture your imagination and fill it with images that serve someone else's purposes. They understand what Paul taught, that sustained mental imagery becomes physical reality. So they flood your consciousness with images of fear, scarcity, division, and powerlessness. When you spend hours consuming news about economic collapse, your imagination is seeded with images of financial insecurity. When you watch endless content about social conflict, your mind rehearses scenarios of division and hostility. When entertainment consistently shows you stories of ordinary people as helpless victims, your imagination accepts powerlessness as normal. You're not just being informed or entertained, you're being programmed to create a reality that serves their interests, not yours. The manipulation runs deeper than most people realize. Political campaigns don't just want your vote, they want your imagination. They flood media with specific images designed to make you visualize their version of the future so vividly that you literally help create it through the mechanism Paul described. Corporate advertising doesn't just promote products. It implants sustained mental images of the lifestyle they want you to pursue. Knowing your imagination will work tirelessly to make those images real. But here's what they can never fully control: your conscious awareness of how this process works. Once you understand that your imagination is the creative force Paul identified as God's spirit within you, once you realize that sustained mental imagery must become physical reality, you reclaim the power they've been using against you. This is why Paul's teaching was so revolutionary. He wasn't promoting religious doctrine. He was revealing that every human being carries within their imagination the same creative force that shapes reality itself. When you consciously choose what images to sustain in your mind, when you persist in visualizing specific outcomes with conviction, you're not hoping or wishing. You're operating the precise spiritual technology Paul documented. Not everything can be said on YouTube, but we go deeper inside Insights Academy, our free newsletter. For a limited time, you'll also get access to a free copy of the Kybalion when you sign up via the link below. The universe doesn't distinguish between images planted by media manipulation and images consciously chosen by you. It simply responds to whatever mental seeds are sustained with conviction. The question isn't whether this process works. It's whether you'll use it consciously or let others use it to control your life. Every sustained thought becomes a seed that must germinate. Every persistent mental image sets forces in motion that must manifest in physical reality. This isn't mystical theory. It's the practical mechanism by which consciousness creates experience. Paul knew it. Those who seek to control, you know it. Now you know it too. For nearly 2,000 years, Christianity has painted Judas Iscariot as history's ultimate villain, the greedy betrayer who sold out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Sunday school teachers whisper his name with disgust. Theologians debate whether he's burning in hell's deepest pit. The very word Judas became synonymous with treachery across dozens of languages. But what if everything you've been told about Judas is not just wrong, but deliberately backwards? Neville Goddard discovered something that shattered his understanding of Scripture, and it happened through direct mystical experience, not theological study. In 1959, Neville had what he called his resurrection vision. He found himself lying in what appeared to be a tomb, completely dead, yet somehow observing his own corpse. His body was wrapped in radiant white burial cloths, and when he looked down, he could see his entrails exposed, spilling from his abdomen. This wasn't some random mystical experience. When Neville researched this vision, he found it matched exactly one specific biblical description, not of Jesus' death, but of Judas's death, as described in Acts chapter 1. According to that account, Judas burst open in the middle, and all his entrails gushed out. The Greek word used suggests an explosive revelation, an opening that reveals what was hidden inside. That's when Neville realized he hadn't just experienced a vision, he had experienced being Judas. And in that moment, everything clicked into place about who Judas really represents. Remember what Paul taught us in that previous section. No one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. If only God's Spirit can know God's thoughts, then who could possibly reveal or betray God's deepest secrets? Only God's own Spirit. The word betray in the original Greek is paradidomi, which doesn't primarily mean treachery. It means to hand over or to reveal. When Judas betrayed Jesus, he was literally handing over the divine secret, revealing what was meant to be revealed. This wasn't the act of an enemy. This was the function of God's own revealing Spirit. Look at the Last Supper scene with fresh eyes. Jesus doesn't treat Judas as an enemy. Instead, he gives Judas the sop, a piece of bread dipped in wine, which was the highest honor a host could bestow on a guest. In Middle Eastern culture, you gave the sop to your most beloved friend, the one closest to your heart. Jesus was honoring the one who would reveal the secret, not condemning a traitor. And consider the name itself. Judas comes from Judah, which means hand of God or praise of God. In Hebrew mysticism, the hand represents creative power and direction. Judah was the tribe that led Israel, the royal line from which kings came. When you understand that Judas literally means the hand of God, his role becomes crystal clear. He's the creative, directing power that reveals divine secrets. Every time someone discovers how imagination actually works and teaches it to others, they're playing the role of Judas. They're revealing what was hidden, handing over the secret that God operates through human imagination. This is why Neville called his own teaching the Judas revelation. He was the hand of God revealing God's method of operation. Think about what this means for conventional religion. Churches want you to look for God in buildings made of stone. They want you to believe salvation comes through rituals, sacraments, and intermediaries. They've built entire power structures around the idea that you need them to reach God. But the Judas revelation destroys all of that by revealing the secret. God's creative power operates through your imagination right now, in this moment. This is why the Judas revelation has been hidden for centuries. It's not just spiritually revolutionary, it's economically and politically revolutionary. When people realize they can create their reality through sustained imagination, they stop looking for salvation from external authorities. They stop being controllable. The mechanics are startlingly simple, which is why they've been hidden behind complex theology and ritual. Your imagination isn't just daydreaming. It's the creative power of God operating through you. When you imagine something vividly and sustain that imagination with feeling, you're literally using the same power that created the universe. The images you consistently hold in your mind become the blueprint for your future experience. This isn't metaphorical or poetic. It's the literal mechanics of reality. Quantum physicists are now discovering what mystics have always known. Consciousness shapes physical reality. Your sustained imagination doesn't just influence your future, it creates it. But here's what makes this knowledge so dangerous to existing power structures. Once you understand how it works, you realize you've been using this power all along, just unconsciously. Every worry you've sustained, every limiting belief you've accepted, every image of lack or limitation you've repeatedly imagined, all of it has been creating your experience. The religious establishment doesn't want you to know this because it makes their intermediary role obsolete. The educational system doesn't want you to know this because it would require completely restructuring how we understand human potential. The economic system doesn't want you to know this because people who understand their creative power stop accepting artificial scarcity. So they've made Judas the villain to hide the fact that he represents the very spirit that reveals these secrets. They've trained you to despise the name that actually means the hand of God revealing divine truth. When Neville experienced himself as Judas, in that vision, he understood that everyone who teaches the true operation of imagination is playing this role. They're the hand of God revealing what was hidden, showing people that the kingdom of heaven, the creative power of God, operates through human imagination. This revelation threatens every institution that depends on people believing they're powerless. It threatens every system that profits from human limitation and fear. That's why the Judas revelation has been buried under 2 millennia of theological misdirection. The question isn't whether you have this power, you do, and you're using it every moment of every day. The urgent question is, what kind of future are you unconsciously creating through the images you're consistently holding in your mind? Because right now, as you're reading this, your imagination is actively shaping what's coming next in your life. The hand of God is operating through you. The only question is whether you're conscious of it or not. Picture this scene. A Hebrew prophet receives the strangest instruction from what he believes is the voice of God. Arise, go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. Not to a temple, not to a mountain, not to some sacred grove, but to a craftsman's workshop. Jeremiah must have wondered what divine revelation could possibly await him among the clay and spinning wheels. What he witnessed there would become one of the most profound blueprints for understanding how reality actually gets shaped. The potter sat at his wheel, hands working the clay with practiced precision. But something went wrong. The vessel became marred, spoiled in the potter's hands. Here's where most of us would expect the story to go one way. Throw out the ruined clay, start over with fresh material. But that's not what happened. Instead, the potter simply began again with the same clay, reshaping it completely into another vessel, as seemed good for him to make. The same material, the same hands, but an entirely different outcome through conscious intention and skill. Now, if this were just a nice story about pottery, Jeremiah wouldn't have bothered recording it. But he recognized something revolutionary in what he'd observed. The Hebrew word for potter here is yatsar, and this is where things get fascinating. Yatsar doesn't just mean someone who works with clay. It literally means to imagine, to form in a mold, to make a resolution, and to determine. Think about those verbs for a moment. To imagine, to form in a mold, to make a resolution, to determine. These aren't the actions of someone merely working with external materials. These are the fundamental operations of consciousness itself. Isaiah confirms this understanding when he writes, "O Lord, you are our potter, we are the work of your hands." But here's the question that changes everything. Who is this Lord that Isaiah is addressing? Throughout the Hebrew scriptures, when people encounter the divine presence, they're told the same name, I am that I am. Not some external deity floating in the clouds, but the very I am consciousness that you experience right now as you read these words. This means you are both the potter and the clay. You are the consciousness that shapes, and you are the life experience being shaped. The instruction to go down to the potter's house isn't about visiting someone else's workshop. It's about turning your attention inward to observe what has actually been formed in your imagination. Here's what most people miss entirely. They live completely identified with the vessel, their current circumstances, their bank account, their relationship status, their health condition, their social position. They think they are the clay formation, when in reality, they are the potter who shaped it. They've forgotten their true identity as the creative consciousness and become hypnotized by their own creation. The wheel in Jeremiah's vision represents something crucial, the continuous movement of imagination. Your imagination never stops spinning. Even right now, as you process these words, your mind is forming images, creating scenarios, running internal dialogues. This wheel of imagination operates 24 hours a day, spinning constantly, always creating, never stopping. The question isn't whether you're using your imagination. You're always using it. The question is whether you're using it consciously or unconsciously. Paul's hidden wisdom that we explored earlier connects directly here. Remember how he spoke of that secret knowledge that transforms everything? This is it, recognizing that the I am consciousness within you is the very potter that shapes your reality. And Judas, that figure we discovered, was actually the revealer of divine secrets. He represents the part of you that must betray identification with the current vessel to allow the potter to reshape everything. Let me give you a practical way to examine your own potter's house. Pay attention to your habitual imaginative patterns. Do you consistently imagine from a victim mentality or a victor consciousness? When you think about your future, do you see limitation or unlimited possibility? When you consider money, relationships, health, what's the dominant mold that your imagination keeps using? These patterns aren't just thoughts floating around harmlessly in your head. They are literally the mold that shapes your life experience. If you constantly imagine scenarios where you're overlooked, undervalued, or struggling, you're actively forming that vessel on the wheel of consciousness. If you habitually see yourself as someone who never gets lucky or can't catch a break, you're using those patterns as the template for what gets created. But here's the transformative revelation that Jeremiah witnessed. Since you are the I am consciousness, and all things are possible to this consciousness, nothing, absolutely nothing, needs to be accepted as permanently fixed. Were you born into certain economic circumstances? That's just the current vessel form. Do you have educational limitations? That's just how the clay has been shaped so far. Are you facing social constraints, health challenges, relationship difficulties? These are all just the current formation on the wheel. The potter in Jeremiah's vision didn't need new clay to create something completely different. The same material that had been shaped into a spoiled vessel became the raw material for something beautiful. Your current circumstances, no matter how challenging or limited they appear, are simply the clay that consciousness can reshape through conscious decision, resolution, and determination to be different. This is why the Hebrew word yatsar includes making a resolution and determining. The potter doesn't just randomly push clay around hoping something good happens. There's intention, decision, determination. When you truly grasp that you are the potter of your own experience, you realize that reshaping your life begins with reshaping what you accept as possible in imagination. The potter's house isn't some external location you visit. It's the workshop of consciousness that you can access anytime you turn attention inward and observe what you've been creating. The wheel is always spinning. The clay is always ready to be reformed. The only question is whether you'll remember that you are the potter, not just the clay. In 1935, Aldous Huxley penned words that would later return to him with devastating precision. In his philosophical work, Ends and Means, he wrote with brutal honesty, "I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning. Consequently, I assumed that it had none, and was able to find satisfactory reasons for this assumption. At the time, this seemed like nothing more than intellectual confession, a brilliant mind acknowledging his own bias toward meaninglessness." Huxley was riding high on his literary success, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of one of England's most distinguished intellectual families. His grandfather was the famous biologist Thomas Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog. His brother Julian would become a renowned evolutionary biologist. Aldous himself had already established his reputation with novels like Brave New World. But seeds planted in consciousness don't care about your reputation or circumstances when they decide to germinate. Fast forward to May 12th, 1961, nearly 3 decades after Huxley had declared his assumption that the world held no meaning. The Hollywood Hills erupted in flames. What started as a small brush fire quickly became an inferno that would consume 40 homes, including the one belonging to Aldous Huxley. Picture this scene. One of the 20th century's most celebrated authors, standing in his pajamas and robe at 4 a.m., watching everything that gave his life tangible meaning turn to ash. The flames weren't selective, they were surgical in their completeness. Gone were the unpublished manuscripts of D.H. Lawrence that had been personally entrusted to Huxley's care, irreplaceable literary treasures that existed nowhere else on earth. His own life's work, decades of handwritten notes, unpublished manuscripts, and research reduced to carbon dust. But the harvest wasn't finished. The fire consumed his generational library, filled with rare first editions collected across generations of the Huxley family, unique art pieces inherited from his illustrious lineage, correspondence with the greatest minds of his era, photographs documenting a lifetime of intellectual achievement. All of it vanished in a matter of hours. When dawn broke, Huxley stood with nothing but the clothes on his back. Everything else, every physical manifestation of meaning in his existence, had been erased as completely as if it had never existed. The mathematical precision of this harvest is staggering. Decades earlier, Huxley had planted a specific seed in consciousness. The world has no meaning. The universe, operating with the absolute reliability that Jeremiah witnessed at the potter's house, had simply reshaped his reality to match his sustained imagination. The man who had intellectually embraced meaninglessness found himself stripped of every material thing that provided meaning to his existence. This demonstrates Paul's warning with terrifying clarity. Do not be deceived. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. But here's what most people miss about this principle. The word sows in the original Greek refers specifically to sustained mental activity. It's not about occasional thoughts or fleeting ideas. It's about the images you maintain, nurture, and return to repeatedly in your imagination. Every image you consistently hold in your mind is a seed planted in the absolutely fertile field of consciousness. And consciousness, like the potter Jeremiah observed, never fails to reshape the clay of your experience to match the pattern you've provided. The crucial element that creates the illusion of disconnection is germination time. Agricultural seeds don't sprout the moment they hit soil, and neither do the seeds of imagination. Huxley planted his philosophical seed in 1935 and harvested its literal manifestation in 1961. 26 years of germination created what seemed like an unrelated catastrophe, but the connection was absolute. This delayed harvest explains why most people never recognize the relationship between their sustained thoughts and their experiences. A woman who spends years imagining herself as financially insecure might find herself facing bankruptcy a decade later, never connecting her current crisis to those old patterns of fearful thinking. A man who consistently visualizes himself as unlovable might watch relationship after relationship crumble, attributing it to bad luck, rather than recognizing the harvest of his own mental seeds. Consider the executive who spent his 30s constantly worried about being found out as incompetent, despite his obvious skills. For years, nothing happened. He received promotions, earned recognition, built a stellar reputation. Then, at 45, a series of seemingly unrelated events converged. A new boss who questioned his methods, a project that highlighted his weaknesses, a reorganization that eliminated his position. What appeared to be corporate politics was actually the harvest of seeds he'd been watering with worry for over a decade. Or take the artist who repeatedly imagined herself as struggling and misunderstood, wearing these labels like badges of authenticity. For years, she had enough work to survive, even modest success. But gradually, opportunities dried up. Galleries stopped calling. Collectors moved on to other artists. She blamed market changes and shifting tastes, never recognizing that she had been faithfully imagining, and therefore, creating her own struggle. The principle operates whether you're conscious of it or not. Every sustained pattern of imagination, every story you tell yourself repeatedly about who you are, what you deserve, how the world works, becomes a seed in the field of consciousness. And consciousness, with the same reliability that governs physical harvests, will eventually produce experiences that match those mental patterns. This isn't mystical speculation, it's the mechanical operation of a law as precise as gravity. Huxley discovered this the hard way, watching his assumption about meaninglessness manifest as the literal removal of meaning from his life. The fire didn't just destroy his possessions, it demonstrated that consciousness had been listening all along to his sustained declaration that the world held no meaning. The question isn't whether this principle is operating in your life. It's whether you're going to become conscious of the seeds you're planting. Every day, through the images you maintain and the stories you repeatedly tell yourself, you're sowing tomorrow's harvest. The only question is whether that harvest will surprise you, like it surprised Huxley, or whether you'll finally take conscious control of what you're planting in the infinite fertility of your own awareness. When Jeremiah witnessed the potter reshaping marred clay into something entirely new, he was seeing the same principle that Jacob understood centuries later. Reality isn't fixed. It can be completely transformed through a specific technique that most people never recognize, even when it's hidden in plain sight within one of the most famous stories ever told. The account of Jacob and Esau isn't a moral tale about sibling rivalry or divine favoritism. It's a precise instruction manual for replacing your current reality with the one you desire. But you have to understand the symbolic language to decode what's actually being taught. Here's the setup. Esau represents your current external reality. Everything your senses tell you is real right now. Your bank account, your relationship status, your health condition, your circumstances. Esau is the firstborn, meaning your present reality always appears first, seems more legitimate, more entitled to continue existing. Jacob represents your internal imaginative state, the reality you desire but haven't yet manifested. Jacob is younger, seemingly less substantial, often dismissed as mere fantasy or wishful thinking. Now watch what happens when Isaac, their blind father, is ready to give his final blessing. Isaac calls for Esau, but Rebekah, representing divine wisdom, instructs Jacob to approach instead. This is where the story becomes a step-by-step technique. Jacob hesitates. He says to his mother, "My brother Esau is a hairy man, but I am smooth-skinned. What if my father touches me?" I would appear to be tricking him. This is exactly what happens when you first attempt to assume a desired state. Your internal voice protests. This feels like pretending. What if I get caught in this fantasy? This doesn't feel real. But Rebekah gives Jacob specific instructions. Put on Esau's clothes. Cover your arms and neck with goat hair. Prepare food the way Esau would. In other words, completely assume the identity of the desired state. Don't just think about it. Wear it. Embody it. Make it so real in your imagination that all your internal senses confirm its reality. Jacob approaches Isaac and declares, "I am Esau, your firstborn." This isn't lying in any conventional sense. This is assuming the desired state so completely that you speak from within it. When you truly inhabit your imagined reality, you don't say, "I want to be successful," or "I hope to be healthy." You say, "I am successful. I am healthy," because that's who you are within the state you're occupying. Here's where it gets fascinating. Isaac becomes suspicious. He says, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." This is the crucial moment that reveals the entire technique. Isaac represents your deeper consciousness trying to determine which reality is true. The voice, your internal dialogue, still sounds like Jacob, like desire, like something unreal. But the hands, what you can actually touch and feel in imagination, feel like Esau, like present reality. Isaac then makes a specific request. "Come close, so that I may feel you." This is the instruction hidden within the story. You must come close to your desired state in imagination. Not just visualize it from a distance, but come so close that you can feel it, touch it, smell it. Jacob approaches wearing Esau's clothes and the goat hair on his arms. When Isaac touches him and smells his clothes, he declares, "The smell is the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed." This is the technique. You must make your imagined state so vivid, so sensory rich, that when your deeper consciousness examines it, all the evidence confirms its reality. You're not just thinking about success, you're wearing the clothes of success, feeling the handshake of congratulation, smelling the leather of your new office chair. You're inhabiting the desired state so completely that your consciousness can touch it and smell it and declare it blessed. Isaac gives Jacob the blessing meant for Esau. He blesses him with abundance, authority, and declares that nations will serve him. The blessing isn't just words, it's the transfer of birthright from current reality to desired reality. Then Esau returns. When he discovers what happened, he cries out to Isaac, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too." But Isaac responds with something profound. "I have blessed him, and he will remain blessed." The blessing cannot be withdrawn. Once your consciousness has fully accepted the new state, once it has given its blessing to the imagined reality, that reality becomes fixed. The old state, Esau, may protest, may demand its rightful place, but the blessing has been transferred irreversibly. Notice that God doesn't punish Jacob for this so-called deception. Instead, God later renames him Israel and makes him the father of the chosen people. Why? Because Jacob understood divine law. He knew that reality isn't determined by external circumstances, but by which state consciousness blesses as real. He understood that birthright, the right to exist and be sustained, can be transferred from current conditions to desired conditions through this specific imaginative act. Esau represents everything that seems permanent about your current situation. But Jacob proves that the younger state, the desired state, can receive the blessing of reality if you know how to approach consciousness correctly. You must come close enough to touch it, to smell it, to inhabit it so completely that when consciousness examines your claim, all the evidence supports your new identity. The practical application is precise. Close your eyes to obvious current reality. Construct a scene in your mind that implies you already possess what you desire. Don't just see it. Come close to it. Feel the texture of success on your skin like Jacob felt the goat hair. Smell the environment of your fulfilled desire like Isaac smelled Esau's clothes. Wear the inner garments of your desired state until your consciousness touches you and declares, "Yes, this is real." Try this tonight. Before sleep, construct one simple scene implying your desire is fulfilled. Don't watch it like a movie. Step into it. Wear it. Let your consciousness feel and smell the evidence until it blesses this new reality as true. The blessing, once given, cannot be withdrawn. Jacob understood what Huxley later discovered and what Jeremiah saw at the potter's house. Reality belongs to whoever consciousness recognizes as real. The question isn't whether you can change your circumstances. The question is whether you know how to approach blind Isaac wearing the clothes of your desired state. Let me share with you the most practical yet profound method I've ever encountered. Something so simple that most people dismiss it, yet so powerful that when properly understood, it becomes the foundation for conscious creation itself. The assumption method works on a principle that sounds almost absurd. You simply assume, in your imagination, that you already are the person you desire to be. Not that you will become this person, not that you're working toward becoming them. You assume you already are them, right now, in this moment. This temporal distinction is where 90% of people fail completely. They live in the future tense. I will be successful. I'm going to find love. I'm working on becoming confident. But consciousness doesn't operate in future tense. It operates in the eternal now. When you assume something in future tense, you're literally programming yourself to always be reaching toward something that remains perpetually out of reach. Here's what happens when you make this shift correctly. When you assume to be something your senses completely deny, when you sustain this assumption despite overwhelming contrary evidence, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The assumption, completely false when first made, starts gaining substance. It's like watching a ghost slowly become solid. I've seen this happen in ways that defy rational explanation. A woman I know assumed she was already living in her dream house in a neighborhood she couldn't afford. Every night, She would fall asleep imagining herself in that specific house, feeling the texture of the walls, hearing the sounds of that particular street. Her bank account said impossible. Her credit score said impossible. The housing market said impossible. But she persisted in her assumption for 8 months. Then her elderly neighbor, whom she barely knew, knocked on her door. Turns out this neighbor owned the exact house she'd been imagining. The neighbor was moving to assisted living and, for reasons she couldn't articulate, felt compelled to offer the house to my friend at a price so low it was practically a gift. The neighbor later said she had no idea why she made this decision, it just felt right. No one can explain exactly how this works. Scientists can't measure it. Philosophers can't categorize it. Theologians struggle to fit it into their frameworks. But here's the beautiful part. You don't need to understand the mechanism. You just need to persist. But persistence isn't what most people think it is. It's not willpower grinding against resistance. It's not mechanical repetition of affirmations. True persistence is faithfulness. The same faithfulness a lover has for the beloved, a mother for her child. You remain faithful to your assumption, the way you remain faithful to someone you love deeply. When doubts arise, and they will, when facts scream the opposite, and they will, you gently return to your assumption, the way you would return to the arms of someone you love after a temporary separation. There's no struggle, no force, just a natural returning to what feels most true. Here's what Neville Goddard discovered that changes everything. You don't need to elaborate the means. Trying to figure out how your assumption will manifest is not just unnecessary, it's counterproductive. It's like trying to direct the circulation of your blood or consciously coordinate the firing of your neurons. The intelligence that transforms assumption into fact operates at levels far beyond conscious planning. This brings us to perhaps the most radical insight of all. The entire world is yourself pushed out. This isn't vague philosophy or metaphorical poetry. This is the literal structure of your experience. Every person you encounter, every circumstance that arises, every seeming coincidence that occurs, all of it is your own consciousness taking the necessary forms to birth your assumption into physical reality. When you truly assume something, people who can help materialize that assumption will be compelled to act in ways that serve your assumption, often without knowing why. They'll think they're exercising free will, and they are, but their will and yours are one at consciousness's deepest level. I watched this happen with a friend who assumed he was already a successful documentary filmmaker, despite having no connections in the industry and no formal training. Within 6 months of sustaining this assumption, he found himself in a coffee shop where he overheard a conversation between 2 producers discussing their need for a specific type of documentary. Something compelled him to introduce himself. Something compelled them to listen. Within an hour, he had his first commission. The precision of these orchestrations defies rational understanding. People you've never met appear at exact moments, with exactly what you need. Doors that seemed welded shut suddenly swing open. Mathematical impossibilities resolve themselves through chains of events so intricate that no human mind could have planned them. But here's the key. None of this happens through your effort or manipulation. It happens through your assumption. When you assume you already are what you desire to be, when you live from that assumption rather than toward it, you set in motion forces that reorganize reality itself. The method is simple. Identify who you would be if your desire were already fulfilled. How would that person think? How would they feel? What would their inner conversation sound like? Then, in the quiet of your imagination, assume you are that person now. Feel it as real. Live from it, not toward it. When you open your eyes and see circumstances that contradict your assumption, remember, you're not trying to change what is. You're faithful to what you know yourself to be in imagination. The outer world will conform not through your effort, but through the natural law that consciousness is the only reality. The assumption method isn't about believing hard enough or visualizing clearly enough. It's about knowing who you are beneath the costume of current circumstances and remaining faithful to that knowing, regardless of what the senses report. This is how gods create, not through force or manipulation, but through the simple assumption of being what they choose to be. Look, I need to tell you something that's going to sound absolutely insane at first, but stick with me, because this changes everything about how you understand your relationships, your problems, and your power to transform them. When I say the entire world is yourself pushed out, I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm talking about the literal structure of your experience. Every person you encounter, every situation you face, every problem that shows up in your life, it's all you. Not philosophically you, not spiritually you in some vague sense. Actually you. Here's what I mean. Think about someone you love deeply. Maybe your child, your partner, a close friend. When you love someone enough to genuinely desire something noble for them, you can do for them exactly what you do for yourself. Not by nagging them, not by trying to change their behavior, not by manipulating circumstances around them. Through the same imaginative act we talked about with Jacob's method, you simply assume they already are what you desire them to be. You see them as they desire to be seen. You maintain this image with complete faithfulness, the same way you maintained your assumption about yourself. And here's the thing that blows people's minds. It works. Not sometimes. Always. When done with the same conviction you apply to your own transformations. Why does this work? Because the other person is literally yourself, pushed out. That separation you feel between you and everyone else. It's an illusion created by your physical senses. Your eyes tell you that person is over there, and you are over here. Your brain, thinking in terms of space and physical boundaries, insists you're separate beings. But at the level of imagination, at the level of I am, there's only one consciousness experiencing itself through infinite points of view. When you imagine nobly for another person, you're not trying to influence them from the outside. You're reorganizing your own consciousness. And since they exist within your consciousness as an expression of it, they must reflect that reorganization. They have no choice in the matter, just like your reflection in a mirror has no choice but to smile when you smile. This seems impossible to grasp when you're thinking from the perspective of your physical brain, trying to understand how one person, over there, could be affected by your imagination, in here. But imagination doesn't exist in space. It has no size, no location, no boundaries. Space exists within imagination, not the other way around. Think about this. In your dreams last night, you experienced an entire world. There were other people, landscapes, buildings, conversations. Where was all of that? Was it in your bedroom? In your brain? Your brain is about 3 pounds of tissue. How could it contain vast landscapes and multiple people having complex interactions? It can't. But your imagination can, because imagination is dimensionless. It's not contained by space. It contains space. The same principle applies to your waking experience. The entire world you perceive exists within your imagination. Every person you know exists as a formation of your consciousness. When you change how you imagine them, you change them, because there's no them separate from your imagination of them. This has staggering practical implications. Every problem you face exists only as a specific configuration of consciousness. Poverty isn't actually a lack of money. It's a consciousness state that manifests as the experience of lacking money. Disease isn't really a biological malfunction. It's a consciousness state that embodies as physical symptoms. Relationship conflicts aren't personality clashes. They're consciousness states externalized as interpersonal drama. Now, this doesn't mean these problems aren't real. They're absolutely real at the level you experience them. If you're broke, you can't pay your rent with philosophy. If you're sick, positive thinking alone won't cure you. But their reality derives from consciousness, not from independent external causes. Change the consciousness state, and the external experience must change correspondingly. It cannot not change, just as your shadow cannot fail to follow your body when you move. Let me give you a specific example. I know a woman who had a teenage son who was failing school, using drugs, and becoming increasingly hostile toward the family. Instead of fighting with him or trying to control his behavior, she began a nightly practice. Every evening before sleep, she would imagine him as the young man she knew he could be, responsible, clear-minded, pursuing his interests with passion. She would have imaginary conversations with him where he expressed gratitude for her support and shared his excitement about his future plans. She maintained this practice for 3 months, never wavering in her assumption that this was who he really was. She didn't lecture him or change her parenting approach. She simply held this image with unwavering faithfulness. Gradually, without any apparent external cause, he began changing. His grades improved, he lost interest in drugs, and their relationship transformed completely. This works because her son, as she experiences him, exists within her consciousness. When she reorganized her consciousness of him, he had to reflect that reorganization. He couldn't do otherwise. The same principle applies to your health, your finances, your career, everything. But here's the crucial part. You have to apply this with the same conviction you learned in Jacob's method. You can't hedge your bets. You can't imagine your desired state while simultaneously acknowledging the current unwanted state as more real. Try this tonight. Choose one person in your life you'd like to see transformed. Instead of focusing on what's wrong with them or what you wish they'd change, imagine them as they would be at their absolute best. Have a conversation with this idealized version. See them thriving, happy, expressing their highest potential. Fall asleep in this assumption. Do this every night for a week and watch what happens. The world is not happening to you. The world is you happening. Every face you see is your face. Every voice you hear is your voice. Every situation you encounter is your consciousness made visible. Once you truly grasp this, you realize you're not trying to change a world outside yourself. You're simply reorganizing the contents of your own imagination. And that you can always do. Now that you understand the profound truth that everyone is yourself pushed out, you're ready for the practical technique that makes conscious creation inevitable. This isn't theory anymore. This is the precise method that transforms assumption into physical reality. The technique itself is elegantly simple. Construct a single scene that implies your desire is already fulfilled. Not will be fulfilled, not might be fulfilled, already is. You're not imagining getting what you want. You're remembering having received it. Here's what makes this work. Your subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and an actual memory. When you repeatedly experience something in imagination with sufficient sensory detail, it becomes as real to your deeper mind as if it had already happened in the physical world. And since your deeper mind is what's actually creating your reality, it simply reproduces in the outer world what it accepts as already true. Let me give you specific examples. If you desire marriage, don't imagine the wedding ceremony. That's the means, not the end. Instead, construct a simple scene where you're already married. Feel a wedding ring on your finger. Turn your hand and catch the light reflecting off the gold. Feel its weight, its smoothness. Maybe imagine someone introducing you to a friend. I'd like you to meet my spouse. Hear those words. Feel the satisfaction of being someone's chosen partner. If you want a new job, don't imagine the interview process or sending resumes. Imagine you already have the position. Picture a colleague shaking your hand saying, "Congratulations on getting the job. We're so excited to have you on the team." Feel their firm handshake. See the genuine smile on their face. Notice the relief and excitement in your own body as you respond, "Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here." For health, don't imagine treatments or recovery processes. Imagine perfect health as your current reality. See your doctor looking at your test results with amazement saying, "I have to admit, I'm surprised. Everything looks completely normal." Whatever you've been doing, keep it up. Watch their expression of pleasant confusion. Feel your own quiet confidence knowing your body has returned to perfect function. But here's the crucial element most people miss. You must experience these scenes from within, through your own eyes. You are not watching a movie of yourself. You are not observing from the outside. You are living the experience. This is the difference between effective imagination and mere fantasy. When you watch yourself from the outside, you're maintaining separation between who you are now and who you want to become. But when you experience the scene from within, you are actually being that person in that moment. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference. Your subconscious accepts the experience as memory. The sensory involvement is what creates the feeling of reality. Touch that ring, feel its texture, temperature, weight. Hear the congratulations. Notice the tone of voice, the background sounds, the echo in the room if there is one. See your doctor's face, the slight widening of their eyes, the way they set down the chart, their body language of pleasant surprise. Continue the scene until it feels real, not until you're tired or bored, but until something in you recognizes this as actual experience. You'll know when this happens because there's a subtle shift, a moment where the imagination stops feeling like pretending and starts feeling like remembering. This is the feeling of reality, and it's your signal that the assumption has been successfully implanted. Once you reach this point, let go. Don't keep trying. Don't repeat the scene obsessively. Don't analyze whether it's working. The seed has been planted. Now allow it to grow in the darkness of your subconscious. The timing matters significantly. The most effective moments are those drowsy states just before sleep and immediately upon waking. In these states, your conscious mind's resistance is naturally lowered, and your subconscious is most receptive to new impressions. This is when the boundary between conscious and unconscious thought becomes permeable. Do this nightly until the assumption feels natural, until thinking of yourself as married, employed, or healthy no longer feels like a stretch, but like simple fact. Some assumptions take hold in days, others in weeks. The timeline depends on how much resistance you have to accepting the new state as real. Here's what most people do wrong. They try too hard. They elaborate endless details about how their desire might come to pass. They repeat the scene mechanically, without engaging their senses or emotions. They watch themselves from outside the experience instead of living within it. If your scene feels forced or unnatural, simplify it. Maybe feeling the ring is too abstract. Instead, imagine looking at your hand while washing dishes and noticing the ring there. If imagining congratulations feels awkward, perhaps imagine casually mentioning your new job to a friend. The scene should feel easy and natural to experience. But understand this, whether you know these principles or not, you are using this same creative power every moment. Every fear you entertain, every limitation you accept, every negative image you sustain is creating your future through exactly this same process. Your imagination is never idle. It's always constructing scenes, and those scenes are always impressing your subconscious with what to create. The person who constantly imagines financial struggle, who repeatedly pictures themselves being rejected, who habitually sees themselves as sick or alone, they are using God's creative power with perfect precision. They're just using it unconsciously to create what they fear rather than what they desire. Ignorance of this law doesn't suspend its operation. You're creating through assumption, whether you realize it or not. The only question is whether you'll do it consciously, deliberately choosing what to assume, or unconsciously, allowing random fears and habitual thoughts to determine your experience. This is why you must become faithful to what you experience in imagination, rather than what your senses currently report. Your senses show you what you created through past assumptions. Your imagination shows you what you're creating now for future experience. Master this technique, and you master the very mechanism by which God creates worlds, including the world you call your life. What I'm about to share with you isn't philosophy or metaphor. It's the literal experience that awaits every single human being, the moment when you remember who you really are. Neville Goddard didn't theorize about this awakening. He lived it. On a night in 1959, he was awakened by what he described as a violent wind, not a gentle breeze, but the same rushing, mighty wind that filled the house on Pentecost. The Holy Spirit had come upon him exactly as Scripture describes. When he opened his eyes, he found himself lying in a tomb, wrapped in moldering gravecloth. He pushed against the stone that sealed his tomb, rolled it away, and emerged to find 3 women waiting for him, witnesses to his resurrection, just as the Gospels describe. But this wasn't the moment of ultimate revelation. That came later, when a young man appeared before him, not a symbolic figure or a vision, but David, the actual biblical David, the shepherd boy who became king. And when David looked at Neville and spoke a single word, "Father," everything clicked into place. Neville described the feeling not as surprise, but as recognition. "Of course," he thought, "you have always been my son. I had just forgotten." In that instant, he understood the deepest truth of existence. He was God the Father, and David, the Messiah, the anointed Christ, was his son. This is your destiny too. As God the Father, you must have a son, and that son is David. When he appears to you and calls you Father, you'll finally understand who you really are. You'll experience that same recognition, not learning something new, but remembering what you've always known. Here's what most people don't understand. Jesus isn't a man who lived 2,000 years ago. Jesus is Jehovah, the Lord God, whose eternal name is I Am. Every time you say, I am, you're pronouncing the name of God in first person singular. You're not invoking some external deity. You're declaring your own divine identity. Before this final awakening occurs, God reveals himself to you in stages. First, you experience yourself as El Shaddai, God Almighty, pure, creative power. This is the power to move mountains, to transform impossible situations, to create something from nothing. You've tasted this power every time your imagination has manifested something that seemed beyond reach. That moment when circumstances shifted in ways that defied logic, when doors opened that appeared permanently closed, when resources appeared from nowhere, that was you experiencing your own divine nature as infinite creative power. But power alone isn't the complete revelation. The full understanding comes when you discover that this infinite power is also infinite love. Not the sentimental, conditional love humans experience, but love as the fundamental force that allows all experience to exist, including suffering, including pain, including everything you've been taught to resist or avoid. God creates everything: light and darkness, peace and conflict, health and disease, abundance and scarcity. This isn't cruelty, it's love in its purest form. Love is giving yourself completely, including the freedom to experience everything possible. That's why you created the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This tree wasn't a mistake or a test. It was the supreme gift you gave yourself. God knew you would eat from it, because God is you making that choice. When you eat from this tree, choosing to experience duality instead of unity, you become what you eat. You experience yourself as both good and evil, pleasure and pain, success and failure, love and fear. This is divine amnesia in action. You're dreaming that you're human, and you're dreaming so deeply that you've forgotten you're the dreamer. Every person you encounter is you. Every situation you face is you creating experiences for yourself. Every challenge you overcome, every relationship that transforms you, every moment of joy or sorrow, all of this is you, the only actor in a cosmic play, performing billions of roles simultaneously. Think about the people who have shaped your life most profoundly. The difficult boss who pushed you to discover inner strength you didn't know you possessed. The lover who broke your heart and taught you about vulnerability. The friend who believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself. These weren't random encounters with separate individuals. They were you, appearing to yourself in different forms, orchestrating exactly the experiences needed for your growth and awakening. Even your greatest struggles serve this purpose. That period of financial hardship that taught you resourcefulness, the illness that revealed your resilience, the loss that opened your heart to deeper compassion. You created all of it, not as punishment, but as curriculum in the school of divine experience. The profound truth is that you don't need to wait for David to appear to begin operating consciously as God. Right now, in this moment, your imagination is divine power in action. Every mental image you sustain, every scene you repeatedly construct in your mind's eye, every assumption you maintain about yourself and your world, these are acts of divine creation. When you learned in the previous section about constructing scenes that imply your desire is fulfilled, you were learning to operate consciously as the creative force you've always been. The technique works because you are the power behind all manifestation. You are the consciousness that shapes reality through focused attention and sustained assumption. This is why Neville could say with complete certainty that imagination creates reality. He wasn't teaching a method, he was revealing your identity. You are the imagination of God, dreaming the dream of being human while retaining all the creative power of your divine nature. The awakening that's coming will confirm what you can begin to know right now. You are not a human being having spiritual experiences. You are God, having a human experience, with all the creative power that identity implies. Your imagination isn't a tool you use, it's who you are. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."